Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. Here are a few pieces of useful material from Further Legends and Traditions of Cheshire by Frederick Woods. This material is quite raw, it will be fleshed out, but with this rough material you can construct your own stories. Birkenhead Hall. The lady of Birkenhead Hall became convinced that her husband was having an affair with the maid. After seething on this for a while, she pushed the maid over the banisters and fled with all the portable valuables in the house to live in a convent in France. The lord returned from some sort of travel, found the corpse of the maid shattered on the floor in the house's entryway, and then had the maid buried in his primary holding in Wales, but she has haunted this hall ever since. There are some options for retelling the story here. If the lady of the hall was wrong, then the ghost wants revenge and can't really have it, so she haunts. Woods says the lord died old, alone, and embittered, but there's the possibility that he instead continued his relationship with the ghost, and this leads to the question of, if you have true love, which in Ars Magica basically comes from the divine, can you have it at the expense of your marriage, which is also blessed by God? The point I'd make is that in some codes of chivalry, marriage precludes true love entirely. In Arthurian, or at least French Arthurian, epitome, Lancelot and Guinevere can have true love, but Arthur and Guinevere cannot. Capesthorne. There is much the same story here as was mentioned in the Christina Hall notes concerning a moving peat island. There is an added detail here that the man becomes ill and the woman nurses him back to health during the storm. Davenham Bridge. Some of the locals haunt a bridge here dressed as skeletons and dancing with a coffin prop. That also seems to dance. They do this to keep the bridge clear at night to allow smugglers to use it without delay. The smugglers are probably moving salt, for which there is a tax paid to the local earl. But there are other things smuggled into this area. German wine, Spanish wine, Aquitanian wine, a lot of wine. Dunham Massey. This manor is haunted by a mason who was pushed from the roof. A master mason found him adding an architecturally unsuitable capstone to a column and, in a fit of anger, killed him, and the ghost of the dead mason wanders the hall, moaning sadly about minor defects in the craftwork. The Gatley Groner. There was this enormously annoying man who died, much to the joy of his neighbours, but this was tempered when his ghost started wandering around in the street, chanting about how he'd never sold unwatered milk or true weight flour. They had their parson put together a praying down team. Now, this, by tradition, requires 7 priests, and in this case all 7 held candles. One cuts the ghost off from his grave, the others hold him in place, while they draw a chalk circle around the ghost, and then they join hands and pray about it until it shrinks, and the local parson binds it under a rock near his gate. Don't move the rock. Gentleman Higgins of Knutsford. Higgins was a surgeon by day and a highwayman by night. He used to sneak out after his wife fell asleep, use woolen socks on his horse to muffle its footfalls, and eventually he was caught when he discussed murder with more familiarity of the scene than was generally known. While he was in prison, he forged an almost perfect pardon and had it posted to his jailer. And once they detected that one, they thought they should get rid of him as quickly as possible and hung him so that he didn't have any other opportunities. Liso. There's a man who spends a day speaking with a mermaid on his boat, and she gives him a ring to remember her by, and he dies of wasting 5 days later. This is no surprise to anyone, because in local folklore this is entirely expected. Longdendale. I've collected a lot of Longdendale stories previously, but I skipped Sir Roe deliberately, because he's obviously Ulysses. He goes away on crusade, and he gets captured, and he takes 10 years to get home. In that time, his neighbour tries to marry his supposed widow. When he's returned, he's unrecognisable, but has somehow managed to retain half of the wedding ring he divided with his wife before he left, and he sends her his half by servant, and she recognises it, and the neighbour is sent off with a flea in his ear. In the Woods version, he returns home by miracle. He falls asleep in his cell and awakens on a hillside he's familiar with near his house. So the miracle brings the man home. There's an area of Marple called No Man's Land, and There's effectively no mundane law there. A man stole some linen that was being stretched by the river, and the court case was long and held in Chester, and at the end, the city didn't want to pay for the costs of the trial, and it's not clear why. One of the clerks discovered that this tiny part of the river was actually owned by a tiny village in Derbyshire, and that village also refused to pay the costs, and in practice that meant there was no one to enforce that ruling or any ruling on that land, because there's no one to pay the wages of the people who was doing the enforcement, and because no one's willing to pay the wages, there is no organisation to try the cases. Sir Gaultier of Hughenden has already had his own episode, but he is mentioned in this book. The sandback crosses. These were raised by King Piada to celebrate his betrothal in 615, and they are holy and have images of Christ upon them. That Piada's bride knifed him in the throat doesn't seem to have affected their dominion aura. Spurstow Hall. There's a house here, or perhaps an inn, where rich peddlers, or relations of the owner, don't leave alive. Eventually the servants inform on the owners, and the dead are found buried under the pantry, each given a small barrel of brandy and left to starve to death. A young man who was off to meet his girlfriend overheard a group of men plotting to attack a farmer's house and rape his daughter, and these are the sons of the local lord, so he couldn't go to the authorities, but he warned the farmer. In a perfect example of why there's a crime called housebreaking in England, the men quietly dug a hole in the side of the man's house, and then one checked the coast was clear by shoving his head through. The farmer, who was awake and attentive, brought his axe down on the man's neck at this point, and refused to give the head back to the dead man's brothers. The body was taken in secret to a churchyard, but wherever a corpse is carried becomes a public right-of-way, and this one is known because a headless ghost walks along its length. The Ghost Trees of Toft. There's a group of chestnut trees here where a woman asked to be buried. She requested a bag of nuts to be buried with her. Woods doesn't say what type, but let's go with chestnuts for thematic continuity. This was so she'd have snacks while waiting for the Day of Judgment. Her ghost dropped one of these nuts, and it was the ancestor of a patch of local trees. So these seem like a mentum vis source. The Tushingham Ghost Duck. Woods here notes his extraordinary skill at finding ghost ducks, because this is the second one in his books. This was a pet duck, and it annoyed the patrons of an inn, so the innkeeper killed it but didn't eat it. Instead, she buried it beneath the staircase. The ghost of the duck would trip, chase, and bite people, so as is traditional in Cheshire, the local pastor called together an A-team of 12 priests, and they prayed down the duck. This duck was shrunk so it was so small that they could put it into a bottle. Things that aren't so much story hooks, but random useful bits of folklore. The name Pelling in this area is a sign of fairy blood. A long time ago, a Welsh farmer saw some fairies dancing and captured one, taking her as his wife, and she would never give her name, but using the same stealth he used to watch her people dance, he snuck close and heard the fairy women mourning the loss of their sister Penelope. Once the man told his wife that he knew her name, she placed a new prohibition on him that she would be forced to leave if he ever struck her with iron. They lived together for many years and had children, but one day a horse was playing up and he tried to slap it with its bridle, and he missed, and he tapped his wife with the bit, so she vanished. The Pellings are all descended from this Penelope. If a woman is married in her shift, an undergarment, her new husband does not take on her debts. Generally speaking, brides change in the vestry. A baby needs to be carried upstairs just after birth so that it will rise in life. To allow this, laying-in rooms are always on the ground floor. If there isn't a suitable staircase, a person may step up onto a chair to complete the ritual. Failure to do this may cause flaws based on ill luck. At funerals, it's customary for all present to touch the hand of the corpse. It's unlucky not to. This may be an echo of the belief that if a murderer touches the corpse of a victim, it will begin to bleed. Woods mentions two festivals of interest: Blazing the Wheat, which involves running around a wheat field with flaming branches to scare off evil spirits, on Old Christmas Night, which is January the 6th. This name for the Feast of the Epiphany doesn't make sense in 1220 because the synchronization of calendars under Gregory the 13th, which shifts the year sufficient days for there to be an Old Christmas Day in January, is still 263 years in the future. England didn't harmonise until 1752, which causes the drift of 11 days. There's also the tradition of maying, where young folk go around the village and put up greenery that jokingly refers to the character of the person who owns the door the greenery is put over. So a young man expected to marry in the next year would get a branch of broom because it rhymes with groom, or a woman who was fair would get a branch of pear. He lists other examples, but if you weren't in on the cant, they never really helped work out what a particular tree meant. Students, one may suggest this includes apprentice magi, demand a holiday on O-Couple Day, which is the 29th of May. There is a traditional song for this. The traditional symbol of the Brutian family is a bear muzzle. A knight of the family was disturbed at dinner by a servant and, in a fit of anger, chased him through the house, finally killing him with a sword. When he turned himself into the king, he was tasked with finding a way to muzzle a bear in 3 days or being fed to one. He succeeded in muzzling one of the bears of the tower and kept this device as his device. The Davenport family has a felon's head in a noose as its device. This may be because they were the king's foresters for Macclesfield and had the right to pass death sentences. Other versions of this story are that an ancestor either killed one of the king's messengers or was cowardly in battle, and they were given this device as a punishment. A used parson's wig is a charm against witches. This is a minor magic item. I wonder if it works while it's still sitting on top of the parson, a sort of hidden weapon in their fight against evil, particularly when you have a gang of 7 of them standing in a circle. Your saga may vary. Oh, Happy New Year.